Hello, friends. Host Eric here. I was talking to famous people, and I just got finished making this video scolding people about how to think about abortion incorrectly. And then I went and pulled in the car, and I thought maybe you should explain how to think about it correctly too, Eric. I'm always shitting on how people are thinking about things wrong, but spend a lot less time explaining how to think about it correctly. So here's the actual reality about abortion. Um, it's a unique issue that defies easy solvency and resolving because of the following reality about it. So, in every circumstance other than abortion, the observation is public, which is to say, in anything that we are dealing with as a matter of analysis, we take on the matter with the understanding that anybody can function as an observer, which is I can see that you punched him, or Joe could also see that you punched him. When we're talking about abortion, we have a strange reality, which is women don't want women want a right to abortion. They don't want something else, okay? And a right to an abortion is also a right to not abort. That's implied by that, right? And and we can see how much this matter of whether or not people ought to have the right to an abortion is predicated on how much on who gets to be the observer. Okay, so if you have a mother who's pregnant and she's 4 months pregnant, let's say 3 months pregnant, and she's super excited about it and getting the nursery ready, etc. And she's the victim of a crime that kills that unborn child. To her, she's lost a child, a person. If a mother does not want this baby, she's 3 months pregnant, and she's finally just accepted, okay, I guess I am pregnant, and then she goes to get an abortion, that's not the same thing that's happened to her. She did not lose a child because she's never been observing it as such the entire time. And under normal circumstances, the things that are observed by one party that are of concern to legal circles can be observed by other parties as well. Pregnancy has this weird observational void going on there. Now, additionally, there's a fact about the universe that is true. Things don't exist until they're observed. So, nobody should argue about Plan B ever, okay? Because the issue of whether or not Plan B is morally acceptable is resolved by the fact that it's never the case that there actually was something that was alive that was killed by Plan B. And the reason it can never be the case that it was is because every time Plan B is used, it eliminates the capacity to observe an extant thing. And as a consequence, since you can't ever, since after you use Plan B, you can never determine whether or not anything existed because you can't observe it, then it can't have existed because it never did get observed, nor could it have ever been observed. Um, because since it was never observed, it doesn't exist. Okay, so I mean, the Plan B issue is easily resolved. Plan B is fine. The only question then of whether or not abortion is morally acceptable really is one of the mother's responsibility that goes along with observation. I can't be responsible for an unforeseeable harm caused by my normal going about my business. So let's say I'm walking down the sidewalk, and right around the corner, somebody has positioned there purposefully, right where somebody's naturally going to step, like a kitten, and I step on it. It's not my fault. I feel bad anyway. But I can't be held morally or legally responsible for some bad action because I didn't take any bad action. There was no intentionality on my part, and what I was doing wasn't reckless in any way. It was perfectly normal behavior. And in fact, there was a third party who positioned things such that my normal behavior would cause that harm. I can't in any way, shape, or form be held accountable for that. The thing that gets people so up in arms about this is that there's no explicit conversation about how this non-legal matter of the role of the observer and the reality of things linking to observation of them makes it such that people are transferring a lot of emotions about things that are related but not relevant. So it is the case that because of that observation component, some individuals who oppose abortion are going to position it as an accountability matter, that without recognizing that they're addressing really observational, like the reality of observational monopoly. So a mother has an observational monopoly on this baby because she's the only one who can observe it because it's inside of her body. Now eventually, when she gets big enough, people can see that she's big in the belly, but even then, unless she's told you that she's pregnant, you'd be very ill-advised to conclude that she is, in most cases, unless it's incredibly obvious, because she might just be fat, you know, and then you got yourself a big FE problem. You got yourself a very angry lady who's very angry at you for calling her pregnant when she's not pregnant. So you don't want to do that. That would be a big mistake. And so basically, a woman has an observational monopoly on this baby, and thus feels as though, on some level, she gets to say whether it exists. And for people who do, and, you know, there is some legitimacy to complaints of women that men have historically exercised a lot of effort to controlling how they use their vaginas, right? That's absolutely true, and that some kind of old school lingering, and it's not just old school lingering social norms, but I mean there is a biological drive towards this. Animal species of all sorts have experienced sexual jealousy when they are of the kind of species that tends towards pairing up, and so it is the case that having historically been more empowered to control, men expressed their half of the jealousy in controlling ways, and that abortion links in various capacities, in various ways, to that history and to that that challenging reality, that all of which lands on one side of the argument. In other words, it is always the case that when individuals attempt to control how other individuals use their bodies, bad shit's going down. But like I said at the beginning of this, abortion's a unique argument block because, unlike every other argument block, one party has an observational monopoly in abortion. So, if you, to go back to the central thesis here of how to think correctly about abortion, then, well, if we were going to try to argue it, we should probably begin there and say, look, we can parse out all the arguments that everybody always uses and that we already understand. All the rights arguments, and all the utilitarian arguments as well. So the thing is, there are plenty of arguments on both sides that people use, some of them appropriately and some wildly inappropriately. You can make rights arguments on behalf of the woman. You can make rights arguments on behalf of the unborn child. You can make utility arguments in favor of abortion. You can make utility arguments against abortion. And you can sort of do socio-political arguments in favor of abortion and socio-political arguments against abortion. Really, all those arguments of the socio-political sort are offensive. They're offensive, okay? As are all the utilitarian ones. They're offensive. Because the utilitarian ones typically go in one of two directions. They're either, these poor women need their abortions, and it's the rich and powerful are trying to make their lives even worse, or it's it's framed as the people who are pregnant, they don't really want their children, the ones who would get abortions, and they're not going to give those kids a good life, and so those kids are just going to be more burden on the system, quote unquote. There are those kind of arguments, both of which are offensive, because you don't know who that person is, and neither does anybody else. And don't say, if a pregnant woman considers abortion, then we can conclude their child is trash. I mean, it's so offensive. Or they run the other direction, which is like, there are these women who are railroaded into getting abortions by the gay agenda or whatever. It's like, because progressives are so into killing babies. They just love it. They cannot get enough. It's just, please, I got the guillotine on maximal speed. Just bring them out one after another. It's like, okay, the reality is the anti-abortion people don't hate women, and the pro-abortion people don't hate babies. Neither party is engaged in knowing wickedness. Neither party is knowingly being wicked. Both sides believe they're completely right about it. But the reason why they can't seem to communicate at all is not, I could do what I always do, which is what I did in the last video, was explain how they're communicating wrong, but maybe it would be better if they just started talking about it like this, because this is actually the truth about it, and I know this, but I never say these things. I always just tell people they're wrong. I really should tell people the right answer as well. So yeah, it's a tricky matter for the courts. The courts are going to have to accept that. It's essentially, like, in certain instances, special pleading is not a fallacy. Special pleading saying, well, this can only be judged within its own frame because it doesn't link adequately to other frames, is another way of saying special pleading. But sometimes things are such a unique issue that they can only be dealt with by a special pleading. And so, in order to make it less special, actually, I guess it's to make it less pleading, I'm not sure, but what we try to do is articulate exactly what it is that is giving us so much trouble in terms of parsing out what the correct thing to do here is. And the thing that's giving us so much trouble is that most people don't like the idea of abortion, really, even pro-abortion people. And they also don't think it's fair, right, just, or true that a woman who gets an abortion should be put in prison for murder. So most people who are against abortion are not in favor of actually convicting women for murder if they get an abortion, even though that would logically follow from their own justifications, right? If you're justifying your opposition to abortion as a violation of the right to life of the fetus, and you want to be consistent, then you should definitely be arguing that every woman who gets an abortion should be convicted of murder. Now, the thing is, almost nobody's arguing that. And the same thing, equivalents are on the other side, right? And the reason it's because nobody's acknowledged that this observational monopoly problem makes abortion a unique issue that defies our ability to successfully resolve it by existing frames. And that's how to think properly about abortion. Well, Eric, so what does that mean? Do we get to have abortions or not? I don't give a fuck. Just don't talk about it wrong.